Please be seated. We come now to the reading and preaching of God's Word, and we continue our walk through the book of Matthew, coming this morning to Matthew chapter 13, and we're taking a look at verses 1 through 9. If you're using the Pew Bible, you can find us on page 818. So I invite you to take out your text, turn to Matthew chapter 13. And before we hear God's Word read and hear God speak to us through his preached Word, I invite you to join me in prayer, asking that God might deliver for us that which he has for us. We might rightly hear it and receive it. Please join me. Lord God, we come before you this morning, thanking you and praising you, that you speak to us in a special way through your preached word. So we ask, Lord, you might do that this morning. Lord, as we consider this text, one that is so often misunderstood, help us to see clearly, Lord, the message you have for us. Help us to understand, Lord, how we should sow with expectation of something to grow. Lord, I ask you to be with me, your servant. Let the words I speak be not my own, but may you speak through me, Lord, as you accomplish your purposes of transforming, of saving and sanctifying. And Lord, may we hear these words and not just let them sit in our brains, but may we seek to live them out. For we ask these things in Jesus Christ's most precious name. Amen. So Matthew chapter 13, Jesus begins a series of parables in this chapter, and in this text he shows how you should expect growth. So give your attention now to God's holy, inerrant, and infallible word. Chapter 13, verse 1. That same day, Jesus went out of the house and sat beside the sea. And great crowds gathered about him. So he got into a boat and sat down. And the whole crowd stood on the beach. And he told them many things in parables, saying, A sower went out to sow. And as he sowed, some seeds fell along the path, and the birds came and devoured them. Other seeds fell on rocky ground, where they did not have much soil, and immediately they sprang up, since they had no depth of soil. But when the sun rose, they were scorched, and since they had no root, they withered away. Other seeds fell among thorns, and the thorns grew up and choked them. Other seeds fell on good soil and produced grain, some 100-fold, some 60, some 30. He who has ears, let him hear. Do you share God's word expecting it to take root, or do you kind of just haphazardly scatter seed and hope for the best? I think most of us do the latter, not the former. We just sow seed wherever, think we can do nothing about it, and just hope God produces something. And quite frankly, we don't expect anything to grow. That's why most of us never spend time sharing God's word. That's probably why most of you don't come to boiler room, evangelistic prayer, or PAL, because you think it's pointless. It serves no purpose. It'll accomplish nothing. See, this is the problem we have. We spend time not believing what God's word says. So we sow haphazardly, and we do this expecting nothing to grow. So maybe what we need is a change of perspective, to think about things differently, to hear what Jesus says through this text this morning. Because what he's showing you is you should sow and expect something to grow. See, that's the point he's making. He's saying, as you sow your seed, don't think nothing's going to happen. But he's saying instead, you should expect growth. So let's listen in as Jesus shares a parable. And here's what I want you to see this morning. I want you to see first, Jesus speaks in parables. Second, parables share the word. And third, the word brings growth. And this brings us to our big idea. I want you to hear these words, get them down, let this change your perspective of how you go about sowing God's word. Here's your big idea. Sow the word and expect some growth. So first, Jesus speaks in parables. You ever hear something and you don't understand it? Like the person speaking is speaking in riddles. You ever do this? Someone's talking to you and you're shaking your head, nodding in agreement, but you're totally lost. No idea what they're saying. You ever somebody say to you, you know what I mean? And you have no idea what you're saying. You say, yeah, I get it. I know what you mean. But you're lost. You're clueless. We tend to do this, right? We don't want to admit we don't know something. And you know how you see that? You see that with this parable right here. Because so many people, even scholars and commentators, what they do is they take this section and they cram it together with verses 18 through 23. And they say, that's the message. But they miss something so key that I'm going to show you this morning. why this pericope is different from 18 through 23. In this section, Jesus shares a parable. But then there's a section in between, 10 through 17, where he explains why he speaks in parables. And then in 18 through 23, he explains the parable. But if you jam them together, guess what happens? You miss the point. It gives you just a simplistic gloss over the text. But you want to dig deeper. You want to see what's going on. And that's why you want to be here each week for the next 3 weeks. This all goes together. So if you're here this week, you're off to a good start. But be here next week and the week after that, or you'll get lost. Because you're going to see how next week he's going to answer the question why he speaks in parables. And you're going to see how parables show true faith. And then the week after that, he's going to explain the parable. But you're going to see something. In this section, he's not speaking to his disciples. He's speaking to the crowd. But that changes in section 18 through 23. And that's something important. Because there he speaks to the disciples. Location and audience matters. And that's what you're seeing right here. What does Jesus do? He changes locations and changes audience. To do that to show how you should expect growth. Look how your text begins. Look at verse 1. Look what it says here. That same day, Jesus went out of the house and sat beside the sea. This provides the context for this parable right here. And it impacts what's going on. Notice the words that begin. It says, on that same day. So what day are we talking about? What day is the same day? Well, this is a day that you saw last week when Jesus was crammed in a house. People were crammed in like sardines. And what was he doing? He was sharing the gospel. And what happened? Mom and brother showed up outside, wanted to interrupt, wanted to interfere with him, stop what he was doing. So what did Jesus do? He used it to teach you about your true family. That's the day that's in view. And what's he doing now? He wants to speak to a larger crowd. And only so many people can fit in the house, so he leaves the house because he wants to teach a much larger crowd. Look at your text, what it says. Jesus went out of the house and sat beside the sea. So what is Jesus doing? He's leading people out of the house to a new location. And this is important because this context shows you something. It helps you to better see why this section is not to be crammed together with 18 through 23. Because here, he's talking to the crowds. Later, he'll be talking specifically to his disciples. But here, it's a great crowd. And where is he doing it at? In a different location, with a different audience. And he's showing, through this parable, how you should expect growth. And he's making clear, this is the case, even though not all the seed will take root. Look how he goes on. This shows you why Jesus speaks in parables. Follow along. Look what it says in verse 2. And great crowds gathered about him. So he got into a boat and sat down. So what are you seeing here? Jesus leaves a crowded house, and he's now sitting on a beach. And what happens? Great crowds gather around him. So he was packed in a house like sardines, no breathing room, leaves, goes on a beach, and guess what? Got the exact same situation. They're gathering all around him. He can't move again. So what's he do? He got into a boat, and he sat down. Now, that's pretty significant. Don't just gloss over that. Why does he sit down? This shows that Jesus is teaching. In Jesus' day, teachers sat down to teach. They didn't do like modern day where people stand in a pulpit to teach or stand in Sunday school to teach and everybody sits down. In Jesus' day, the teacher got to sit down and you all stood up. How about we start doing that next week, huh? You're probably saying, no, you stand, we'll sit. But that's what Jesus is doing. And it's showing something key, that he's teaching the crowd. A great crowd that's gathered around him is now on the beach, and he's teaching them all. And understand something. This shows how he's speaking to so many more people at one time. And you're going to see why he gets under the boat momentarily. What's significant about being out on the lake? But what you're seeing right here is he spent time in their synagogues, teaching them. Spent time in their houses, teaching them. But they're limited audiences. So now what's he doing? Taking his word to a much larger audience. So he gets into the boat. They're on the seashore. He instructed a greater number of people. And know what you're seeing with this? Jesus is actually giving thought to how and where he sows God's word. Think about that. Do you do that? Do you give thought about how and where you share the gospel? Or do you just scatter seed everywhere and hope for the best? God causes growth. There's nothing I can do. Well, Jesus shows right here that that's how you want to do it. You want to think about who and where and how you share God's word and do it in a way that shows you should expect growth. That's what he's showing right here. Because he's showing what? He's going to give you 3 illustrations where seed doesn't grow. But I don't want you to miss something. Don't miss this. This is not a parable of the soil. It's a parable of the sower. So the focus is not on the soil, but it's on the sower and what happens with him. So what is Jesus doing? He's going to show how not all the seed is going to take root. Look what he does. He's telling a whole crowd this. He needs a small house to teach a great crowd. Look how verse 2 ends. And the whole crowd stood on the beach. So what do you have here? You got a picture of Jesus sitting, taking a teacher's position, and he's teaching a large class. And this isn't like a college auditorium. This is like teaching in Shea Stadium. There's a lot of people there. So ask yourself, how are they all going to hear him? There's no microphones. There's no speakers. And that's why you don't want to miss the text. Look what it says. He went onto the lake and sat down in a boat. That's significant. You know why? There's this thing known as refraction. You know what refraction is? It's where water actually causes voices to carry further. So Jesus, by sitting on a lake, is like a modern day system of microphone and speakers, but he's using nature. And that means his voice is going to carry. Understand this, because of refraction, if you got a half-mile lake, you're on one side, somebody's away from you a half mile, you can hear what they say. That's what refraction does. That's why Jesus is on a lake speaking. He wants to make sure everybody who's doing what? Look what it says. There's a great crowd gathered on the beach. He wants to make sure they all hear what he has to say. But here's the thing that's confusing. He wants to make sure they hear him, but he doesn't speak plainly. See, Jesus uses an allegory. What's an allegory? It's a story with a hidden meaning, something you got to kind of figure out. It usually has some type of moral lesson. So that's what Jesus is doing, because you're seeing right here how Jesus speaks in parables. What's a parable? It's something not easily understood. It's usually an earthly story with some heavenly or spiritual purpose. It gives you some spiritual lesson. So what he's doing is speaking a lesson not easily understood. And you know what? That's probably how it sounds to most people when you try to share the gospel with them. You know when you go to the park and they're jogging and you jump in their way and say, "Stop, let me share the gospel with you." They're thinking, "What are you doing? I was on a run trying to get healthy." You're speaking to them thinking you're crazy. They don't understand what you're talking about. Or when you just wake up some stranger, knock on the person, "Hey, can I share the gospel with you?" Is that how you should do it? Or you should be thinking about how and where you share the gospel, how and where you meet the audience. That's what he's showing right here. So what does he do? He changes locations, gets a large crowd, but he knows their hearts. So he speaks in parables. Because what he wants to showing us is, oftentimes, we don't share the gospel clearly. It's like we give people these hidden messages they got to try and figure out on their own. And they leave scratching their head like, what are he talking about? That's why, what do we do with unsaved people? We give them the law. We forget what Romans 8 says. They can't even follow the law. They don't understand it. They need the gospel. Can you clearly share the gospel in a concise fashion that helps people to understand who Christ is and what he's done? That he's God himself who left his throne in heaven to live a life of perfect obedience, to die on the cross so you don't have to? Can you do that in like less than 3 minutes? That's what Christ is making a point here. We don't want to just share the gospel with just anybody, just throwing our seeds away. We want to do what? Do like Jesus does. Think about who and where and how you do it. That's what you want to consider. Because when you do that, then you sow differently. And you sow in a way where you expect something to grow. Because that's what you need to do. Sow expecting something to grow. Because you should expect growth. So what is Jesus doing here? He's teaching. But again, what's he doing? Jesus speaks in parables. Why do I say this? Look at verse 3a. Look what it says here. And he told them many things in parables, saying, this makes so clear that Jesus speaks in parables. It says it plainly, right? You can see it. Jesus told them many things in parables. And again, what's a parable? It's an allegory. It's an earthly story with a heavenly purpose. Teaches some spiritual lesson. Gives you some spiritual truth. So that tells us through this parable, Jesus is giving you some spiritual truth. But he's not clearly proclaiming the gospel. Why not? Why is he not doing like he was doing in the house? Speaking of the virgin birth and why that matters. Why does the virgin birth matter? Can you explain that to somebody why that matters? So Christ isn't tainted by sin? So Christ can live a life of perfect obedience? So he can die as your perfect atoning sacrifice? And what can you tell people how he didn't stay dead, but he rose from the grave and ascends on high to open your eyes so you can understand parables? They're not like confusing for you? See, that's why the crowd's confused. They don't have the Spirit. Christ is teaching them. and he's teaching you today. That's why he said he's spoken many things in parables. As you'll see next week, Jesus speaks in parables for a very specific purpose. It's to fulfill what Isaiah says. And it shows how parables show true faith. You'll see that next week. But for now, I want you to see how he's making the spiritual truth that you should expect growth. Just scattering seeds and hoping for the best is not the way to go. That's not what Jesus does. And that's, again, is why, as you'll see momentarily, this is a parable of the sower and not of the soil. Because what does Christ do? He uses you to sow his fields so souls are saved and sanctified. That's what God's word does. So ask yourself, are you spending time planting, expecting to see souls saved and sanctified, or are you just throwing your seeds away and hoping for the best? See, how you sow matters. That's what Christ is making clear. Sow in a way that shows you should expect growth. Do this knowing what Christ is telling you here this morning. Sow the word and expect some growth. This means you need to really consider and sow seed with care, which brings us to our second point. Parables sow the word. Do you regularly share the word? Do you find that whenever you open your mouth, you're sharing the gospel, teaching God's word? Or are you more likely to pray for an opportunity to do that? What's more likely to come out of your mouth? Sharing the gospel, or God, help me to have an opportunity to share the word? See, that's the problem we have. We treat sharing God's word, sharing the gospel, like a special event, not an everyday occurrence. So what do? Oh, praise the Lord. I'm going to lunch with Bob in 2 weeks. Pray God will give me an opportunity to share the word with him. Well, you know what? You got opportunity all the time. You see Bob all the time at work. Just share the word. Don't treat it like a special event. But that's what we do. What it ought to be is sharing God's word ought to be a way of life, not some special event that comes along once in a while. See, because what do? We go to prayer time. We say, praise God. This guy I've been working with for the past 3 years, I shared the word with him at lunch yesterday. Didn't I do good? Pat myself on the back. Aren't I a wonderful person? And I have no idea what's going on with him afterwards. I don't care. I shared the word. Aren't I wonderful? Shouldn't I be praised? How about sharing the word expecting some growth? Don't just talk about good gospel conversations. I love that language. Had a good conversation. Well, what happened? I don't know. They're still going to hell. Well, how's that a good conversation? Sounds like a faulty conversation to me. A good conversation where they'd be changed. They'd be saved, brought to saving faith. What are you looking for? Are you expecting some growth? Or are you saying, I'm just going to throw the seed away? Jesus is making clear here. You should expect growth. Because if you do, then you're more inclined to share God's word regularly. It won't be a special event. That's what Jesus is telling this great crowd standing on the beach. And it's why he gives us a parable, not about the soil, but about a sower. Look how verse 3 begins. Look what it says here. A sower went out to sow. This makes so clear. What you're hearing is an earthly story, a parable about a sower. So what does this mean? This is an agricultural parable. Probably more fitting for Jesus' day than today, because we don't live in an agrarian society anymore. They did. They lived in an agrarian society. We live in what? A post-industrial, service-oriented society. So that means we're not maybe familiar with the language that Jesus uses. So let me explain it for you, help you understand it. It talks by saying what? A sower. So what's a sower? A sower's a farmer. This is somebody who makes his living by sowing a field. So ask yourself, if he makes his living, if his livelihood, his very life depends on something being produced, you think he's just scattering seed haphazardly and hoping for the best? Or is he planting intentionally and expecting some growth? See, that's what you're seeing right here. It's a sower who grows a crop. Doesn't matter what he grows, but he grows a crop that he can sell at market to earn some money so he can live, so he can survive. His life depends on it. So what you see here is, what's crucial is not that what's being sown, but it's the idea of a sower who went out to sow. This means something. This guy's intentional about how he goes about sowing, because he's sowing in a way that expects something to grow. So let me ask you, do you sow expecting something to grow? Or do you say, it's never going to happen? Do you invite somebody to worship and get surprised when they show up? Like, I can't believe they actually came. I've been praying about it. I can't believe God heard my prayer and answered. Or do you expect it? See, you should expect growth. That's what you're seeing right here. So ask yourself this. Suppose you're a farmer. Your livelihood depends on you growing a good crop. Are you going to take your seeds and just scatter them anywhere you go? You're walking to the market, you just scatter seeds? You're going to go to your neighbor's property and scatter some seeds? Or are you going to put them on your own field? Do it on your lot. What would make more sense? And do it where you know, where you can have some control, where you can actually tend to it, right? That's the idea. Like a sower prepares his field beforehand, you need to know where people stand beforehand. Understand. Ask yourself some questions. Is this person lost? Are they struggling? Are they hurting in some way? There's my gospel opportunity to show them how Christ heals and helps. Are they hostile and resistant? Then maybe you don't want to sow there. Maybe you say, you know what? Let me just pray God to soften their heart, and then I'll sow. Because what do you have? You got limited time and limited seeds. Like a farmer. He's got limited seeds, limited time. He doesn't scatter seeds everywhere. He's purposeful and intentional about it. So consider where and how you sow. And as you do so, expect something to grow, because you should expect growth. Even though you know some seeds won't take root. Look at verse 4. Look what it says. And as he sowed, some seeds fell along the path, and the birds came and devoured them. This is a picture of a farmer sowing a seed, trying to grow a crop. And what happens? It's showing you how parables sow the word. Because what you're seeing here is, you got to sow the word a lot, because some will fall on the path. So think about again what you have here. You got a sower or a farmer who earns his living by what he grows. This means he knows where and how to plant. This guy isn't just a novice here, he's an expert. So what happens? Some seed falls on the path, and he knows this. Now, what is this showing us here? What are you seeing here with the path? This is some path he's walking to the market. This is the path between what he's growing. It says you're growing a large crop. What do you have to have? You need paths in between so you can walk and harvest the crop. Otherwise, you got to kind of work through the corn and try to work your way through and get lost in the maze. It doesn't work. You got these paths. So as you're sowing seed, what do you think's happening? Some's falling on the path. That's what happens. But don't focus on the seed that falls on the path that birds come and devour. But notice how the text ends. And you'll see that momentarily, how some seed falls on good soil. So the idea is, as you sow seed, yes, some will land on hard hearts and won't take root. Don't let that discourage you or stop you from sowing, though. This farmer, he knows he's got to sow a lot of seed, and some will fall on the path, and birds will devour it. And what does he say? Praise God, he's caring for his creation. Give him the birds something to eat. That's you could do the same thing. But sow in a way that shows you should expect growth. Even though you know some seed will fall on hard hearts that it can't penetrate. If you want to grow a good crop, you know what you need to do? You need to sow a lot of seed. That means you can't share the gospel like some special event. It needs to be a daily occurrence, something you share all the time. You live it out. People see you live differently, and they say, why are you so different? And now you've got an opportunity. You let them know what Christ has done for you. Tell them about today's testimony, how Christ is blessing you today, what he's doing for you. See, our problem is we don't expect growth. And what do? We run to God's word to support it. We look at 1 Corinthians 3:7. What's that say there? We read this earlier. What's it say? So neither he who plants nor he who waters anything, but only God who gives the growth. So we say, see, there it is. God causes the growth. Nothing I can do. But we miss something so key. 1 Corinthians 3 is not about growth. It's about church unity. People working together. That's why it says in verse 9, we're co-workers with God. But this text right here is about church growth. It's about sowing a seed to produce something. And it's showing how not all the seeds you sow will work. You need to sow a lot. Look how he goes on to say in verse 5. Look what it says here. Other seeds fell on rocky ground where they didn't have much soil. And immediately they sprang up since they had no depth of soil. This shows how parables sow the word. This sower, this farmer, he's not sowing seed just to keep busy. He's not sowing seed just to waste his time and his money. He's got a purpose in mind. He's sowing to produce a crop. So how about you? Why do you sow God's word? Is it to produce something or just to have a good conversation? Pat yourself on the back and say, look how wonderful job I did. Ask yourself, what's the purpose of sowing God's word? It ought to be to produce a crop, to produce a harvest. You should expect some growth. And understand that as you sow God's word, like a farmer sowing seed, some will land in the wrong places. That's okay. But even though it does, you should expect growth. And I know this makes people uncomfortable because, again, we say God causes a growth. And yes, he does. Don't hear me saying God doesn't cause the growth. He does. Only God can change a heart. But how does God work? He works through means. See, God could say, you're saved, you're saved, you're saved, and you're saved. But he doesn't do it that way. What's he do? He sends his people into his field to harvest his crop, which means you need to do what? Like it says in 1 Corinthians 3, some must plant, some must water. You need to do God's work, be a co-worker with God, and actually plant some seeds. Otherwise, what happens is you sit back doing nothing, clicking your TV on your clicker saying, well, I hope God saves them. Hope it works out for them. I know I'm okay. Not too good for them, though. You need to have a different attitude. You got to say, I'm going to sow expecting something to grow. You should expect growth. That's the idea. Even though some seed will fall where it can't produce or quickly fade away. That's what you're seeing right here. What's it say again? Look at your text again. It falls in wrong places like rocky ground where they didn't have much soil. Jesus will explain later in 18 to 23 what this means. But for now, Jesus is sharing a parable with a large audience gathered on the beach. And he's making a point that not all seeds will take root. Why? Because like it says, immediately they sprang up since they had no depth of soil. And this means the plant didn't last. And you see this in how the parable goes on in verse 6. So what it goes on to say. But when the sun rose, they were scorched. This shows how parables sow the word. Even though not all of it takes root, understand what you have here. A parable of a sower, an experienced farmer. This guy's not too dumb to see a whole bunch of rocks laying on the ground. That's not the picture. He's not saying, oh, a bunch of rocks. I think I'll plant some seed here. That's not the idea. What's going on? There's bedrock under the soil, like 4 or 5 inches down. You can't see it. The soil looks good, and it is good, but there's bedrock underneath preventing growth. So it springs up quickly and then withers with the sun. That's the idea. That's why he says, when the sun rose, they were scorched. If we don't jump ahead and let the text speak for itself, like textocentric preaching does, then you see the message here. And it's not that bad soil means you're not going to produce stuff, but it's that you should expect growth. That's why you sow seed in the first place. That's the purpose of sowing, because you expect God to work through your work, to use your sowing to produce growth, to save souls. Otherwise, if you don't expect growth, then you're sharing the gospel like a hired hand. What's a hired hand do? He works the field, but he doesn't really care. He just wants to have a job, wants to work for the season. Is that how you sow the word? Like you're doing your duty? God says I have to do this, so I better do it. Let me just scatter some seed and be happy. Or you're more intentional and purposeful. Ask yourself, where do you stand? Are you seeking to produce a crop, or are you just doing a duty? See, why you sow impacts how you go about sowing. It impacts where you go about sowing. It impacts what you do and how you do it. Ask yourself, are you expecting some growth? Or are you just trying to make yourself feel good and tell people about what a wonderful job you did because you shared the gospel with somebody after me talking with them for 6 months? How do you go about it? What do you do? If you're after true growth, then what do? You sow regularly and intentionally and purposefully. You sow expecting something to grow. And that's why this parable, again, is a parable of the sower and not the soil. Right here you're seeing some of these grew up quickly, but when the sun came out, they were scorched. The sun rose, and they were scorched. And this means there was no life, only death. See, that's why you want to share the gospel, because the gospel brings life. Everything else brings only death. People need life. They need the words of life. Look how verse 6 ends. Look what it says. And since they had no root, they withered away. This shows that parables sow the word, and it brings life. For life to come about, a heart must be changed. And that's why some people hear the word and it never takes root, because God must change the heart. He must regenerate the heart for it to produce something. They have no root, so they quickly wither away. But it shouldn't be this way. It should not be what you expect. Because what you're seeing right here is you should sow expecting something to grow. That's the idea. Because what does the word do? The word brings life. That's why others hear and are impacted. That's why people walk through the doors of Grace Church, hear the gospel, and come back again, and guess what happens? They get saved, and their lives change, and they stop living the same old way, but they live differently. So let me ask you, how about you? Have you been here several weeks, but it makes no difference in your life? Or has the word taken root? Has the word taken root and produced a change? What happens when you hear and understand that Jesus Christ is God himself, who left his throne in heaven to be born of a virgin, to live a life of perfect obedience, to do for you what you can never do for yourself, and to die for your sins? Does that matter to you? Or do you say, that's good to hear, let me go about my life now? Or does it make a difference? I want people to hear this. I want people to know. I want people to be changed. I want to sow expecting something to grow. Ask yourself, when you come to worship and you hear the message preached, does it impact you in any way whatsoever? Does it change how you think, what you do, how you live? Because understand something. You can't hear God speak to you and live the same old way like you did before. That shows maybe you got a hard heart. And that means trouble will come and you'll quickly fade away. It needs to take root, which means you got to ask yourself, what are you doing with God's word? Are you reading God's word, studying your Bible, and saying, I did my duty? Or is God impacting you and changing you? Are you searching out his promises? Or are you just justifying and excusing your sin away? Like it's no big deal. God knows I love him. I'm okay. Doesn't matter how I live. Understand something. How you live matters. People see it. That often produces growth. How about when you pray? Are you praying, expecting God to answer? Expecting God to help on your heart, to change what you do, how you think? You ever pray, God, change my thought process? Help me to love people more? Do you want to be around Christ and his church more? Do you ever pray that? Or do you just pray, God, heal my finger, it hurts? How do you pray? What do you do? It all depends on what you expect. Ask yourself, are you praying and planting in the way that you're expecting growth? See, that's what you should do. You should expect some growth. Even though you face various scenarios, various difficulties, various hardships, they may seem there's no way I could do anything for God, but you can. So God shows how, yes, there's challenges. And you see this in verse 7. Look what it says here. Verse 7 says, other seeds fell among the thorns, and the thorns grew up and choked them. This is now the third situation where sower's seed doesn't produce growth. And it's because why? The seeds fell among the thorns. The thorns grew up and choked them. So what's in view here? Well, if you're a farmer, if you sow seeds, you know what happens. If there's weeds or thorns, they compete with the crop for the nutrients in the soil. They compete with the water in the soil. And these weeds are winning out. They're choking so they don't grow. Jesus is giving 3 illustrations to show, yes, there'll be times when the seed will not grow. But that means not to stop sowing. This farmer, this sower, a parable of the sower, he makes his living by producing a crop. So he's expecting some growth. So you should do likewise. Sow in a way that shows you expect some growth. Because Jesus was born of a virgin. That makes a difference. That's how you produce growth. Because Christ changes you. If you've been changed, then what does that mean? You understand what Christ has done for you. Didn't just live and die for you, but rose from the grave to conquer sin and death for you. Ascended on high, descend in spirit to indwell you, change you, make you new, open your eyes, equip, enable, empower you to trust what he says, to sow and expect something to grow. So do you? See, if Christ changed you, that's what you do. You don't just see obstacles and say there's nothing I can do, but you say God can overcome these obstacles. He knows there'll be obstacles. He knows there'll be difficulties. Yes, you may not feel like it. Your back may hurt. You may feel like you can't talk well, but you know the gospel, so you can share it. You can tell people what they need to know. Because Christ lives and dies to make you new. And when you're new, you do new things. You live in a new way. That's the idea. Think about a baby. We've had babies born, right, in a church. Are they growing? Are you surprised that Levi's 1 year old, he's bigger than when he was first born? Remember when he was first born, you hold him in the palm of your hand? Now it's like, oh, he's kind of heavy. Are you shocked by that? Like surprised? Like, I can't believe the guy grew. You expect that, right? You expect people to grow. If he wasn't growing, that'd be shocking. Well, how about with God's church? Do you expect that to grow? When Christ promises, Matthew 16:18, I will grow my church, do you say, I expect that to happen? Or do you say, you know what? Probably not going to happen here. You know why? Because we're so faithful. We love God so much, we do everything we should, that nothing grows. Does that make any sense? What is God showing you here? you should expect growth, because that's what life does. Life produces growth. And he's changed you and brought you from death to life so you can go and do what? Produce more life. That's the idea. What do you need to do? You need to sow, expecting something to grow. So let me ask you, is that what you're doing? As you look over your Christian years, 1 year, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, 20, 30, 40, 50 years with Christ, ask yourself, how many souls have been saved through you? Or do you say, well, none, but that's God's doing. God causes growth. How many disciples have been made through you? Has God used you to impact anybody's life whatsoever? And if not, are you content with that? You think that makes you a good sower? Or are you saying, maybe I need to think differently? Maybe I'm spending my time, my focus, my resources on the wrong things. Maybe, just maybe, I'm not sowing in the right places or the right way. Now understand something. Don't get bogged down and thinking you can do it all. Because again, we made it clear. God causes a growth, but he does it through means. You're the means he uses. That's how he saves souls. Ask yourself how you came to saving faith. Wasn't there somebody who was in your life that shared the word, talked about Christ, led you down that path, and it made a difference, right? Are you willing to do that for somebody else? Ask yourself, what do you expect to happen? Are you expecting growth? See, that's what you should do. You'd expect to see some growth. Sow in a way that shows you expect something to grow. Hear what Jesus says to you this morning. Sow the word and expect some growth. Let this cause you to share God's word regularly and intentionally, purposefully, considering how you go about it, and expect growth, which leads us to our third and final point. The word brings growth. Have you ever shared the word, invited someone to worship, have them come, and they actually got saved? When that happens, you get shocked? Do you get surprised? Is that too Baptistic or Pentecostal to think that God will actually use his word to save souls? See, the problem we have in many Presbyterian and Reformed circles is we're content to increase our head knowledge and never increase the way we share the word. We know more and more, but it never leaves our head. What do we need to be doing? We need to be expecting growth. Because if you expect growth, you know what happens? You actually share the word. That's what we're seeing right here. You should expect growth. Because when you share the word, what happens? Growth happens. Because the word brings growth. How do you see this? Look at verse 8. I want you to really pay attention here. Here's the crux of your text. This is this parable of the sower. Other seeds fell on good soil and produced grain, some 100-fold, some 60, and some 30. This makes so clear, shows conclusively, that God's word brings growth. It may be different amounts of growth, but it's growth nonetheless. There's some growth. That's how God blesses his people, by giving you an abundance, by giving you more. We saw this in Genesis 26:12 with Isaac. What happened? God blessed him because he reaped 100-fold. And what happened? The Philistines were jealous of him. Are people jealous of you because people are following you to Christ? Their lives are being changed. They're saying, man, that woman, that guy, they helped me so much. Is that what's happening? Are you expecting growth? See right here what happens. Some seed falls on good soil and produce grain, some 100-fold, some 60, and some 30. This makes clear that some seed does grow. Let me say that again. Some seed does grow. That's why you should expect growth. And understand something. It's not a pittance. It's not a small amount. These are not crumbs falling off the table. This is a huge harvest. Even 30 times is very large. And this is 30, 60, or 100-fold. That's a huge, huge harvest. 1 Corinthians 3:7 makes clear. God causes the growth. When we work with God as co-workers, and we're used by him to go into his field and do some planting and some harvesting. But to do that, you got to expect growth. So ask yourself, is that what you're doing? Are you sharing God's word expecting something to happen? Are you praying expecting something to happen? That's what you need to do. You need to expect growth. Because you'll see a harvest of 30, 60, or 100-fold. That's what Jesus is driving at in this parable. Again, it's a parable of the sower, not the soil. And how does he drive this home? Look at verse 9 that ends your text. Look what it says here. He who has ears, let him hear. This makes so clear that the word brings growth. And that's why if you're sowing the word, you should expect growth. The sower doesn't sow just to keep busy, just to waste his time and his resources. He sows expecting a good crop to grow. His life depends on it. Look what Jesus says. He who has ears, let him hear. That's kind of striking, isn't it? Most people have ears, right? If you look around the sanctuary, every single one of you has ears. So what's going on here? Why do you say he who has ears? Because he's talking to all of you. He's saying you need to do what? You need to hear. And what does that mean? Well, the Greek word translated here actually means to listen or to obey. His point is, this parable is not about obstacles, not about why things don't grow, not about the challenges you'll face, why you should just throw in a towel and give up. It's what? He's showing that God's kingdom grows as you expect growth. As you sow, expecting something to grow, God's kingdom grows. That's the idea. That's what he's driving at. So let me ask you, is that what you're doing? Is that how you sow? Do you expect to see something happen? Or do you say, I'm just waiting for that right time, right location, right moment, and then I'll share the word and something may happen. And if it does, I'll be really surprised. We should be sowing expecting to grow. That's the idea. Because why? That's what the gospel does. Isn't that what the gospel did with you? What's the gospel? It's the idea that Jesus Christ, God himself, leaves his throne in heaven to be born of a virgin. He does this so he can fulfill the law perfectly. Do for you what you could never do for yourself. And he does that so he and he alone can go to the cross as your once for all perfect atoning sacrifice. And what happens? He dies on the cross, but he doesn't stay dead, does he? He rises from the grave, conquering sin and death, so you might be lifted up from death to life. And how's that happen? Because he ascends on high. Remember, Christ must ascend for the Spirit to descend to indwell you and change you, make you new. Open your eyes to understand God's word, even when he speaks in parables. So I hope you understand now what you're seeing here. Not a parable of the soils, but a parable of the sower. And a sower sows expecting growth. So how about you? Be encouraged. You'll face challenges. You'll face difficulties. But God will still bring about growth as you go forth and sow expecting some growth. So do just that. Sow in a way that shows you should expect growth. So go and sow and expect something to grow. Because what Jesus says to you here this morning, sow the word and expect some growth. Do you now see why you should expect some growth? Do you see why this parable should not be crammed together with 18 through 23 and just gloss over it and say, here's what it means? Jesus is digging deeper. He's showing so clearly. Yes, some seeds will fall in the path and be eaten by birds. Others will fall what? On where there's no depth of soil. They'll quickly wither away. Others will get choked out by weeds. But he's saying, but in the end, what happens? A great harvest of 30, 60, 100-fold. That's what you want to see, brothers and sisters, friends and guests. See not the failures, but the successes. See what God promised and what he does. A huge, large crop. So ask yourself, how will you now sow? Will you haphazardly scatter your seed and hope for the best? Or will you be more intentional, more purposeful, and more expectant? Why not sow expecting something to grow? That's what Jesus is driving at right here. See, what you do depends on what you expect. If you expect nothing to happen, then guess what? You'll sow the word like some special event. But if you expect to see growth, you expect to see souls saved, if you truly love people, care about them, want to see them saved, guess what? You'll not let a moment pass where you don't share the gospel with them. How could you? How bad would that be? Sow the word, expecting growth. That's what you're seeing right here. Don't sow haphazardly expecting the best, but be intentional and purposeful. And there's people all around. The grocery store, the bank, your work, your school, in your neighborhood. We're surrounded by a lot of unbelievers, people who need to know. They need to know the truth. So share it with them. And as you do so, you should expect growth. Hear what Jesus says to you this morning. Take this home, live this out. Sow the word and expect some growth. Let's pray. Will you join me? Lord God, we come before you this morning, thanking you and praising you, Lord, for how you structure your word. We thank you, Lord, that Jesus tells this parable of the sower and not the soil, Lord, to help us to see how we should sow, expecting something to grow. So may we do just that, Lord. May we not treat your word like something that we do once in a while, some special event, but may we share it daily, always, Lord. as we speak it and live it out. And Lord, as we do this, use us as the ordinary means by which you produce the extraordinary. Lord, help us to see what you're telling us here this morning, that we need to sow the word and expect some growth. May we do just this. We ask it in Christ's name. Amen.